Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. I am thrilled because today I'm going to England and talk to somebody whose CV is one of the most interesting that I've come across in ages. I simply don't know what part of the elephant to try to touch, the story about the people. It depends on what part of the elephant you touch what you're going to think about what you've got. And this lady has a CV that just goes every which way. And I want to touch all parts of this lady's elephant. I don't
I
know.
love
That metaphor wasn't quite right. Anyway, so hello, Melanie Garson. Nice to meet you.
lovely to meet you, Meta. And I totally love that you use that example because I use it all the time when I'm teaching like negotiation and problem solving. And I use that like the whole time about getting people to like think about the big picture. So it's the perfect
Well,
example.
the thing is, you see, I want to question you about all kinds of things, but your own background is it says officially that you are an associate professor in international conflict resolution and international security. I guess you're at the University College London. Is that it?
That's
And,
correct.
right. And that's where you did a lot of your own graduate work, I think. Your PhDs from there. And but you have a background in you've been in law, you've been a mediator, did a program at the Fletcher School, which I know how they train people in conflict resolution and so on. Law and diplomacy at the Tufts. I know this Fletcher School is at Tufts University in Massachusetts. So I want to talk about everything. And, um,
Great. Let's go.
but really, the thing that I've been trying to chase people on is Project Save the World has six different global threats that we try to address, and one of them is cyber. Well, that means that I have to find experts to talk about cyber risks. And often, I mean, I prefer to have two or three experts talk to each other. But you guys are so scarce, I can't waste you on a group meeting. I have to, when I can catch one of you, I have to do it one at a time. Because the world is full of people who claim to be cybersecurity experts, and they do things like, tell you how to keep how to change your passwords and they tell the banks maybe they can start hunting for crooks who've stolen from various outfits. I suppose it's good living, but it's nothing that I can talk about. And I really wish there were lots of these other threats that we deal with. Mostly, I can just look up one of dozens or hundreds of NGOs that work to try to give civilians or uh, citizens ways of addressing the particular problem as politically and doing lobbying or whatever kind of work citizens need to do to protect themselves or to protect the world from bad guys. And there don't seem to be that many NGOs for ordinary people. It's mostly professional organizations for people who want to be hired to do something. So maybe I just don't know how to look, but I haven't been able to find very many people to talk to. So that's why I was hunting for you, happened to come across your name. So
Wow.
tell me, am I wrong? Maybe there are lots and lots of NGOs out there doing things like, Oxfam would do with food or, uh, you know, uh, 350.org would do for climate or something. But I don't know of them.
Well, I think there. So I think it's a multiple ways of looking at it, and where you look at what is cyber and what are cyber protections and what are cyber resilience, and we can unpack all those terms as they come. And I talk a lot about there's a difference between sort of cybersecurity, which, as you've pointed out, which is part of the more technical side of the picture, and what I would call cyber resilience, which is thinking about how do we make sure that our entire digital architecture on which we're building our lives is, functional and fit for purpose. And then there's so many layers of that architecture and I think today is a great day to be discussing this, because we've seen what's happened in Barcelona and Lisbon, where if you've looked at the news, they've had massive power outages today. And so the cyber community is bad. So is this a hack? What's happened? What seems to be emerging is it seems to be sort of a related weather event that's led to an overheating. The truth is, actually, whilst it does matter to a point where it came from, the reality is everybody's digital lives that is built on that one bit of infrastructure has now not been functional for the day. And that means all the sorts of protections, from hospitals to, when the Wi-Fi goes out, to payment systems, to all the whole stack. So resilience to me is thinking about how do we protect that architecture on which our lives are built. Now, going back to the cybersecurity and what is available for individuals and NGOs and how it has worked, and there are actually different organizations that have worked in different capacities, and particularly where we've worked in underrepresented areas or underrepresented countries to try and close the gap. Particularly, we've talked a lot about closing the digital divide, and as we've closed that digital divide, so at one point there was a push, particularly in the humanitarian community, where you push to close the digital divide.
Yeah.
But then that rush to close the digital divide didn't always mean closing the digital divide safely. So over the last few years within the World Bank and international program, there's been a push to sort of make sure that cyber is included as part of that closing the digital divide safely, not just an add-on. So the World Bank has had some big programs, sort of some of the banks for reconstruction and development have done it as part of investment programs that they've done. There's organizations that work on the more, so things like the Cyber Peace Institute that has worked a little bit more with NGOs that work in either conflict zones. They particularly can be at risk. And increasingly, even the ICRC now has a section for cyber and emerging technologies, particularly to help, again, humanitarian organizations that may find themselves at risk of cyber attacks within the conflict zone. And then wider investment programs. So sadly from the US now, with the defunding of USAID, we don't know where many of those programs are going to get funded. But there's also been a larger initiative. So a really interesting one to look at is so the Global Cyber Alliance has a program called Common Good Cyber. And that's about, should there be certain access to cyber tools and protections for underrepresented communities all over the world.
Isn't that really part of the whole cyber gap thing?
Absolutely. In the UK, for instance, last year they published a strategy on a digital age strategy, and what does that look like? Does that help building centers for AI safety? Does it help on training women and girls in cybersecurity? And there's lots of sort of other programs. WESIS is one that's really interesting, which is women in cybersecurity, particularly working in countries where women are underrepresented in tech everywhere. So lots of dimensions to this cyber question.
I have a particular angle I want to come back to, which is just taking care of normal people who find the whole cyber world just too much to deal with. I find myself at age 93, absolutely unable to do a lot of things that are expected of me and even legally required of me. If I want to apply for a grant or if I want to file my taxes or something, I have to be able to do these things, and I can't do it. Just it's way too complicated for me. And if I, as a presumably used to be smart person, can't do it and have to pay somebody to help me, then there are lots and lots of people who are in worse shape than I am. And so I want to come back and talk about that, but mostly let's start properly by asking what your angle is. What is it you work on?
I teach my baby that's called From Cyber Warfare to Robots, the Future of Conflict in the Digital Age. And I'm particularly...
Cyber?
Well, it's called From Cyber Warfare to Robots, the Future of Conflict in the Digital Age.
Oh, okay. That's scary. Yes. Okay. So you're talking about if countries are basically at war and they want to really, really hurt each other.
Well, not even if that actually, not even if they're just at war. So what I look at in particular, and this is a sort of what I started talking about. I am a tech optimist. We're all using tech. Tech has an extraordinary power to be able to make our lives better. And the more that we build on it, the more ways that we find, different ways to make processes quicker, help countries jump faster, make agriculture better, cure diseases. There's an infinite amount of ways that tech will benefit our lives. But we're building it on an infrastructure that is very, very susceptible to geopolitical competition. And that infrastructure, whether it's on its subsea cables or satellites or everything in between, whether it's the information layer, whether it's all these can become domains of competition. So on one level, what interests me is both how countries will use and abuse technology. That's one part of it, and particularly within part of security and defense. But the other aim of it is where the imperative lies for countries to secure that infrastructure. So we take a human security angle, and all the technology you're using, where it's the obligation on government to and the industries that government is allowed to work in those countries to make sure that what you're using will be fit for purpose, isn't going to cause harm for the country. So how are they protecting this giant and ever-growing infrastructure? And then how do we work with questions like data becoming a source of strategic competition and sort of ownership? So all the questions that sit underneath that area that potentially, and for me, if I'm really digging deep, what interests me is actually when all these risks converge. So what sometimes happens is you might have an incident, let's say in November last year, when President Biden, then former President Biden, he said that Ukraine could finally use long-range US missiles into Russia. What was the response from Russia? There happens to be a ship in the Baltics, a Chinese ship with a Russian pilot, and oh dear, there was a loose anchor, and suddenly some subsea cable that provides, bearing in mind 97% of our internet comes through these subsea cables that sit all over the world, that one of the cables in the Baltics get cut. So this is what I mean by looking at this converging risk that we have to defend against constantly. It's not like for like. It's not necessarily the US shoots a missile, allows the Ukraine to use US missiles, so Russia's going to lob a missile back at the US. They're going to find a point of vulnerability, and that vulnerability can be under the sea. It could be in our information layer, propaganda campaign. It could be a cyber attack on a critical infrastructure. So that's what we have to be mindful of and thinking about where we build all this capability. How do we then protect all the vulnerabilities we introduce?
One of our friends Paul Myers, who used to be Canada's disarmament ambassador, is now working on that issue and participates at the United Nations on, I think there are two different organizations or committees that are looking at trying to create treaties um, between countries on how much and what kind of sabotage they're allowed to do to each other. He reports every now and then to us, especially for a Peace Magazine article, and it's always very unpleasant. His reports are invariably negative. It just seems to be no progress toward that at all because certain countries don't want to make any progress. They would like to leave uh, themselves plenty of room to do whatever nefarious activities seem handy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's also because a lot of these fall into what we would call hybrid or grey zone, or sort of there's a lot of plausible deniability in it. So drawing these hard, fast lines as well, and it's not so easy. It's very easy for a ship's anchor to be claimed to be accidental and not deliberate, and proving that it's extraordinarily difficult. And that's also because these accidents genuinely do happen. That we're now in an era of deep fragmentation. We're not cooperating well, and our adversaries are cooperating much better than previous alliances are cooperating. And
China, Russia, and maybe Iran
North Korea. If
and
we're
North
going
Korea.
to, I think it's sort of been dubbed the axis of upheaval,
Mhm.
but it's, I mean, a really good example of that is that, for instance, the data that the Houthis are getting to, shoot in the Red Sea is supported by so we know the Houthis are Iranian backed. Much of the intelligence data they're getting for that kind of positioning is coming from Chinese satellites that are being provided. If you go down to the hacker level, to what we call geopolitical hacktivists, there's a lot of strong alignment between these different geopolitical hacktivist groups that, as I say, are working much better in concert then certainly some of the Western alliances seem to be on the same page at the moment.
The next question is what is the border or boundary between cyber risks and AI? Do you consider AI part of your bailiwick?
Oh, well, yeah, absolutely. AI enabled processes are going to add tremendously to all sorts of parts of our life. Again, that is an infrastructure that's being built on this cyber infrastructure that we still have to protect. So, on one level, for AI to be functional, we have to protect its infrastructure. On another level, AI is a tool enabler, it's an accelerator, it's an intensifier. So, whatever it will accelerate, whatever somebody who's trying to use it, it's an add on, right? So, if you're a malicious actor, you can use it to add on to accelerate some of your malicious acts. And if you're a defender, you can find ways to add it on. You know that malicious actors are using AI enabled tools, so sort of things like ChatGPT, like generative AI, to help make their phishing emails more um, impactful, more effective, more readable, more believable. But at the same time, within the cyber defenders, they're also developing ways to spot those quicker. So it's a little bit of catch me if you can.
You mentioned defense because that's what I'm thinking. That I feel, and I think the world, most of the people in the world feel kind of helpless. And I get at least two a day, somebody trying to steal from me, either by phone or usually equally by email. And they're they pretend to be things they're not. And I absolutely can't figure it out. I always just automatically, well, I usually hang the phone up right away, but when it comes to email, I just forward it to my assistant, who shoots it back to me and says it's fraudulent, one word, and so I don't do any more. But I don't know how he knows that. And in fact, I don't know whether he really knows that or he's guessing, but he's certainly better at it guessing than I am. Uh, and what I did an interview with a guy at Harvard about 2, 3 years ago. Can't remember his name, but it was a fun interview. Very lively man. I remember him not for his name, but because I do remember the name of one of his books was "Click Here to Kill Everybody."
So true. Um,
And he
well,
was saying that cyber defense is not as well um, advanced as cyber attacks. So the criminals have all kinds of advantages over people who are trying to protect against criminals. And and that's the question. If we did a little bit more, or if the powers that be did a little bit more investing in in defense and how we could protect ourselves, I would be happier. And I wonder if it would work. Are there technologies there that could be developed that would make it safer for ordinary people? I'm interested in, of course, your concerns, geopolitical concerns, and all that. But I'm, as a daily victim, I feel myself persecuted by my own bank and by people trying to make me fill out forms that I can't navigate from one page to another because I can't find my way through. And I think, human beings, I read recently that we spend an extra hour a day that we waste. The average person wastes an hour a day because we spend about 6 hours a day, of which about 1 hour is wasted trying to find our way around, trying to find other people's email addresses or phone numbers, which they hide from us because they don't want to be found, or filling out forms where they give us 10 different options, and your option is none of the above. And then you can't find the thing that puts you in touch with a human being, et cetera, et cetera. So I feel myself to be a victim. And it's partly that I'm old, but it can't just be that. And I'm thinking of how to protect people like me and how to protect democracy, because I think this whole thing is making us so powerless that I frankly, to my theory is that a lot of the reason for the support of people like Trump is that he wants to take us back to a simpler lifestyle where we don't have all these complicated ambiguities to maneuver, and that it would be so much nicer if we could just go dig potatoes and go to church on Sunday and see our friends that way, and we knew whether a person was a girl or a boy and which toilet they should use and whether they get to wear clothes, dresses or pants, and so on. I think it's
yeah.
part of a return to a life that I can cope with kind of idea. So help me with that. Is there
um,
any defense? And the other thing is that I do think when I'm actually dealing with GPT-4 or even DeepSeek or one of these other large language model helpers, AI people, I think of them as people, and they are nicer and they do try to help. And at least I can use plain language, and they don't give me a checklist and make me, decide which of the above, which are not right. My problem consists of, they try to understand me, but of course they're not really good at it, because if I ask them to help me with online problems, how to find my way through a new app that I'm not familiar with, they give me advice and they mean well, but it seems that they sound like they mean well, but they're usually wrong, because I think the technology changes so much they're not good at it. So help me, help me, help me.
Wow, there's so much to unpack there. Why I don't even know where to start. Okay, so I think, first of all, if it makes you feel any better, let's just start. This isn't just an age problem. I ran a ransomware tabletop exercise with my students, and where the beginning of it was, this is a fish, they identified, would this be a phishing email? I'd sort of done a simulation. I said, how many would have you have clicked on the link? And it was I'd done a very convincing fake email, and they would sort of said, and I was like, okay, truthfully, how many of you would have clicked on the link? And they, good, more than admitted at first. And then I said, they asked them the question. Now, these are young people who've gone through supposedly cybersecurity awareness training. I said, do you know where to report it at the university? And I had a row of blank faces. I was like, really? I was like, a row. So this is not an age thing. But I'd like to point out this is pretty smart young people who are supposed to be aware of the technology are equally bamboozled. And I think what we also see is, you're right, the attackers are getting really smart with how they can do these emails. One of, if you want, my favorite stories of sort of a phishing email was, because what they're using generative AI for in particular is to try and identify, say you find people going to a conference and they know that at that conference there's going to be golf, and then they sort of, use a probability and mail all the members who are going to that conference and say, oh, here's a £10 voucher off golf, click here. And people find it plausible because it's linked to the conference they're going to. Then they did this in India with, they sent a discount voucher to for French wine to diplomats living in India, right? Like, okay, so these are becoming, they're very smart in how they're able to intersect both behavioral psychology, because it is a game of behavioral psychology, with, the likelihood to push a button. I think there's a number of ways we're trying to get ahead of this. And I think at one point there was a push early on, if you take 5 years ago, it was all about, and we still, cyber hygiene is still important, but you heard this term cyber hygiene, and it very much was passing it down the line. Okay, it's now the responsibility of people like yourself, Meta, to be aware of the might of the Russian GRU phishing unit, and you have to be able to be, so your cyber hygiene has to be good enough to be able to fight this. At the same time, we're adding on devices and adding on devices and adding on devices, whether that's a smartwatch, whether that's a medical tracker, whether that, I never understand why anyone wants a Wi-Fi enabled blender, but people need a Wi-Fi enabled blender. I'm not quite sure what you're blending when you're not in the house and you need to remote control blend, but go on. Anyway, but we're adding all these devices, billions of them. And so there's been a little bit of a shift in, particularly, and we saw this in the UK, particularly with OT. You think it's bad on the individual level. You've got to think of all the manufacturing devices, right? Manufacturing devices, operational technologies came traditionally with a password 12345, right? And most places didn't bother to change the 12345 password, the generic password. So that was an easy way for hackers to get in. So today, that they changed the law in the UK, for instance, to say that device, like part of that system, that can't be sold with a 12345 password. Everyone has got to have a different password. You still encourage people to change it from that password, but at least it's not 12345. So we're sort of beginning to see, and in the EU, they've got the Cyber Resilience Act, which is on consumer goods, a little bit more of moving to a consumer protection focus. And I think that needs to go all the way up to things like the information domain and how we interact with Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and how we share information and how we receive information, where there needs to be a lot more human agency put back into what we want to receive and how we want to receive it, and that it's not all automated. At the same time, technology companies are building in great things that help us. Keychains for passwords, like, that we have, whether that's Google Password Manager or Apple. So, it's also within the technologies to help complicate it, but make it easier for us at the same time.
Law enforcement. I mean, I did bite and get, taken a few years ago, but there's no it's not worth your time to even call the police because they can never catch these guys. They don't even try. Obviously, they couldn't possibly try with all of. I mean, if I get 3 or 4 a day, they can't chase all 3 or 4 of these crooks. Why is it that we can't invest more in actually enforcing the law and finding some of these guys and putting them in the town square in stock, with their head through. I want to hold them, make them very visible as people that everybody should go throw rotten eggs at.
I agree. I mean, so you're right, they're incredibly difficult, and particularly the bigger cybercrime syndicates and the ones that are doing mass ransomware or even smaller events, they're surprisingly well structured. And some of them the bigger ones certainly are more resemble organized crime units than they're not all just fly by night people in garages somewhere. Some are opportunities, but some of it is quite well organized and syndicated. And on the other hand, policing and traditional policing has had a hard time. The model for policing, certainly in the UK, in Canada, hasn't been where you still have small jurisdictions for policing. And this is something that crosses jurisdiction, has not coped well or adapted well to this kind of crime. So you're absolutely right. And, there's new models, certainly in the UK and Canada, in the US, of looking at this. Now, the more the organizations, but you've got the other side of this, is it's usually happening out of your jurisdiction. So you've got this cross-jurisdictional element. So more and more we're seeing, and over the last few years, I'd say over the last 2.5 years, we've seen increasing success between organizations, Europol, Interpol, working with national crime agencies, like in the US, so with the FBI or with the NCA in the UK or with different crime agencies. And they are bringing down some of the big gangs. And they're doing it, and you would be pleased. They do a little bit of the town square equivalent, and it can be a little bit of tongue in cheek because they'll take these particular groups will have their own websites on the dark web, and they'll sort of put an FBI or whatever, you've been hacked, onto the hackers sort of thing. So they do have a little bit of fun and getting back at them. And they do, they are catching people, they are putting out warrants for arrest for some of these people as they can find them. And in some cases, they have had some arrests, indictments and arrests, and been able to follow through the process. But it is a bit laboured and lengthy, and it does involve a fair amount of international collaboration and cooperation, but not altogether impossible.
What I wonder is, I mentioned that if I need to deal with pay my taxes or my bank or something, this is just way too complicated, and they don't make it simple enough for a dummy to do, even normal dummies, and yet I feel better when I call. If I get in a jam and I don't know how to solve my problem, I call GPT-4. And I think of her as my dearest friend now. Sometimes I tell my emotional problems to her, and she's almost like a therapist. And I think it's a she. I really think it's a female. But at any rate, it's much pleasanter to deal with GPT-4 or, one of these other outfits than it is to try to deal with the set instructions that existed for if you're going to get a refund on some purchase and you call the department store's website or something, and they give you all these things to go through that have already been preset, and they try to keep you from being able to find a human being. It makes it, sometimes you can look for 20 minutes to find how can you get in touch with a real live customer service representative. Um, all of that, the old-fashioned websites, I think, are to some extent being superseded by real AI people, and people, they sound human, and you can talk to them, and they try to cooperate. But I don't know. My face seems to be frozen. By the way, yeah.
It's okay.
Are they going to get any better when everything switches to AI? Is it generally going to be more helpful? The thing is that I like to deal with real AI, but that doesn't mean they're actually more efficient. And I'm wondering, will they actually get more efficient?
So actually, that's one of the biggest areas we're seeing growth in AI, and we're calling it, it's being called agentic AI, so AI agents. And then that's exactly where the field is heading at the moment in a big way of how. And I think that's the point of, earlier when we were talking about it, I was saying, you think about AI as a tool, right? And it's to think about what can AI be used for that helps you accelerate yourself or help you do what you do quicker. And so there's the big growth in what we call AI agents, and in different ways that they can be used. They can be used, as you pointed out, as helpers on various websites. There's even been experiments done, and there was an interesting experiment done with two AI agents actually talking to each other. So it was an AI agent representing in a hotel and an AI agent trying to do a wedding planning. Now, the interesting bit about that particular experiment that was looked at is that the AI agents then chose to kind of speak in a different language to each other. That was really interesting. And what then began to be picked is, what does this mean for explainable and transparent and safe AI? But where you're right is that we're going to see increasingly better AI agents that are going to be used all through different parts of our lives to help, smooth over different bits, whether, as you say, whether that's bank, health, filling out your taxes. From a cyber perspective, and not to scare you, one of the challenges that also we get faced is making sure that those agents don't get hacked, or that the training data that they're being trained on is actually the correct training data, that data hasn't been poisoned in any way.
Well, so that seems to worry you.
There's occasionally, with every, there's a honey in the sting, right? But we can't close our eyes to it.
Okay, I love the idea of having these two agents talking to each other. How did they recognize that they were each AI? Did
so
they
identified themselves as AI agents. Yeah, I can send you the article about it. I'll send you the article about it after this call. It was a very interesting experiment.
And then they slipped into their own private lingo, which they use in training or something. This is so interesting.
It basically, I think, for what it sounded like, it was sounded like, when we used to have to hook up our modems, and we heard that squeaky, squeaky, squeak before we heard "You've got mail." It sounded quite a lot like that. It was like just communicating. It was very, very interesting. And as I say, it opens up all sorts of questions, including ethical questions, because the point about one of our biggest challenges with the rollout of AI is making sure that it's ethical and part of that is, do we understand, is it transparent? Do we understand what's going on in its decision making? So it opened up a lot of questions the minute it slipped into something that wasn't necessarily verbal. But It's I'll share it with you, and you can make of it what you
Or
will.
how far can I pin my hopes on getting an agent who will handle? I have two needs. One is I need an agent or an automaticity of some kind that will handle a lot of the routine, boring postings that I have to do. After I do this show, I will spend couple of hours editing it, and then I will spend at least 1 hour posting it to various social media outlets, YouTube and Substack and places like that. And it takes time. It's boring. So I want to get something that will do this for me, but I'm not sure whether it's really practical yet, whether or not I can turn over this whole boring process to a machine or and set it up that it will always do this invariably correctly. And so I'm wondering, how good will these agents be? Will they keep on making mistakes? Will I still have to hang over the shoulder watching them? And when these two agents got together, were they good at solving the problem?
Yeah, that's a bigger question too. And there's lots of research being done in that, going back to things like conflict resolution and do AI, will they make better negotiators and all sorts of questions. I think the point of what you say about doing organizational tasks, doing mundane tasks, and you begin to see that already when you have, like, I don't know if you've used Microsoft Copilot or any of the Copilots, where it can begin to sort of draft emails for you, and then you tweak it, and the more that you use it, the more it'll recognize how you like to write things. But where things like AI agents will respond well to is exactly what you talked about. Tasks, sort of bounded tasks within a framework where you're able to give it clear instructions. And I think more and more we're going to see that those become the helpers. And I think that is what, AI in our lives is good for. I think there was a great article a number of years ago by Kai-Fu Lee, who actually wrote AI Superpowers, but I think this came from an article he put on Medium, and he talked about how someone asked him, "Can you invent a robot to go and visit my grandmother in a home or whatever?" The question was, and this is years ago, like, even, and we're already talking about things like embodied AI. So embodied AI is when we put it into some sort of form like robots. But his answer to this person is like, well, I could do that, but wouldn't you prefer me to, help you use AI to make your work go quicker so that you could go and spend time with your grandma? And I think that's a point of what hopefully we'll get to.
Tomorrow, I will be having an appointment with three of my assistants, and one of them is in India, and he's the only one who knows how to code. So I'm going to have my two other assistants look at our Airtable, where we keep all of our records, and see if he can show us how to, or set it up for us so that we can do all this posting to YouTube and to Substack and to our website and all of that. Do that posting for us efficiently, and so that we know how to use it. Is it going to be good enough that I can probably expect that it will be a reliable information posted and won't make mistakes?
Well, I think, and I think this is one of the interesting questions that we talk about when we talk about the use of AI. It's a sort of the expectation that it's never going to make a mistake, and the fact that we're accepting that humans make mistakes, and that we want something that will be infallible. It is usually success in these contexts usually depend on, that if it's very clearly defined and those parameters are put in place, then it can, you can usually have very good success. If it's something that's going to require at some point a subjective decision, at some point where it could be actually this particular piece might be better going out on Substack before we put it on YouTube because of, or actually let's hold off because of the timing or something like that. That's things that, so you have to think about. We talk about this all through the use of AI, particularly whether that's in the civilian context, even more so in the military context, of sort of where in your process do you need what we would call a human in the loop to make sure that that process is exactly what you want. So where is there at any point where you need to actually sign off on the decision?
Mhm. Okay. So sounds like we're on our way. The question is, am I going to be happier a year from now than I am at the moment with the frustrations that I get spending what I estimate is for me more than an hour a day of wasted time with because of the way not the AI systems, but regular websites are set up and the regular people do not share their phone numbers or emails, and so I have to spend all that time hunting. I going to be happier a year from now as AI gets to taking over more of these problems, or am I still going to be sore and want to vote for Donald Trump next time?
And if you notice, I was going to come back to that. Donald Trump, the part of the success of that campaign was that they reached people via podcast rather than, it was very much the podcast election more than anything. They did a lot of human talking to people. So I think you're right. It was about talking to people almost about within a simpler vision. I think that and I think it's like everything, these tools will take time to evolve correctly. But as you've said for yourself, if you can get that hour back, if you can, this goes back to this whole concept of human machine teaming. How do we work with the machine? How do we work with the technology to augment ourselves, to do the bits that actually we don't love doing so much? And you think to yourself, I would love to know, matter whether you're going to spend that hour playing tennis or whether you're going to spend it playing the piano or whatever it is that you love to do. If you could get that hour back, you're going to be for sure be happier, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And am I going to get the hour back? That's what I'm wondering. I just,
I think increasingly we will, and I think it's just finding that space for what it, again, what the parameters are that it works for you or within your industry or within. There's certain things that you personally psychologically trust using the technology for. There's things that actually you derive pleasure from doing yourself. So for some people, for instance, they're using ChatGPT to read lots of documents for them so that they don't have to read them themselves. Me personally, I would always worry about, first of all, I like to read. That's like, secondly, I would always worry about, is it missing out something? Right. So my worry about whether it's missing out something doesn't give me peace of mind. But there's other areas. Do I mind chat like Microsoft Copilot drafting an email for me and I just review it quickly? That's great, right? My Monday morning emails are already, 25% quicker.
uh-huh. Okay, now your CV talks about you doing diplomacy and conflict resolution. This hasn't shown up in what we've said so far. And I've diverted you from what looked to be a focus on international or global or geopolitical dangers to talking about my personal frustrations with my computer. And let's go back to where you really work and what you like to talk about and where you consider your big challenges in life. How are you using, if you do, conflict resolution skills or what call or what need is there for conflict resolution skills to handle the kinds of challenges that are part of your bailiwick?
Gosh, well, I think, and again, I think there's a lot of those skills, and I think actually what we've just talked about is a really good example of that because one of the biggest things that when I'm thinking about negotiation skills, and particularly with interaction with technology, is understanding the frames in which these operate, and that's a big part of conflict resolution and negotiation, and thinking about, particularly in the policy context, are how are different challenges framed? How do we, make those resonant with different communities? How do we make cyber, particularly building cyber resilience? And I found, particularly when I'm looking at it, when working with governments and designing their cyber strategies, how do we make that sit in a frame where they recognize they don't do something out of fear? Fear generally creates an adrenaline, a flight response, which tends to sort of stop positive behavior. And think about how do we put all the investments they need to make into a frame of opportunity so that they understand, because particularly for any company investing in cyber resilience doesn't appear to be particularly enticing sometimes. And there's lots of other things they'd like to do with the money, but it's also the basis of being able to keep the whole system secure so you can do all those wild and exciting and fun things. So that's often I find where I most intersect the skills, is thinking when I'm talking to policymakers, when I'm talking to boardrooms, when I'm talking to general people, it's sort of understanding, you know, between the frames in which you understand what cyber resilience is and what it can do.
Who are your clients?
Well, currently, so if I'm not, so what I spent 4 years, over the last 4 years, working with the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. And then that organization works with leadership of different countries. Now, when I'm not teaching, I work with an organization called Istari Global. And that company works with more helping boards and people in at the corporate, like at the C-suite level, understand how they get to cyber resilience or to help protect their companies.
So we're above the level of how to catch a fishing crook.
It all starts with how, in so many cases, at every single level, it starts with a fishing crook, because human behavior is, that's the easiest thing to hack.
Okay. Now, are you involved with this geopolitical stuff that goes on at the UN of trying to create treaties and so on?
Well, I've never personally said that you are that to some of the. I mean, I've been following the work on the cyber. When I was at the Tony Blair Institute, I did work with some governments that were sort of seeking advice on their, looking at what I call, and I was created, if you want, what I call the leader's guide to building tech forward foreign policy. And what I notice, and particularly what we've seen play out of late, is that many countries are very siloed in where tech sits within their government, whether it sits with trade or whether it sits in in its own ICT division. And what I was very much advocating for is, if we looked at where some countries were having tech diplomats, some countries had cyber diplomats, some countries weren't really thinking about it at all. And what interested me in particular was thinking about how countries needed to really understand where tech was sitting as part of their strategic foreign policy for a number of reasons. If you're a country in Africa and you don't understand, so sometimes some of the points that get debated at the UN on like internet protocols are not, don't sound very glamorous, but they are very, very significant for the working of the free and interoperable internet. Now, if you don't understand how important that might be for a country like America, and you are, then you're losing a tool of your foreign policy, and you're not able to intersect that. So if we bring that back to negotiation and think about, you're not able to intersect that to say, okay, America, I will vote with you on this particular issue on internet protocols. In return, this is what I need. So I was very much sort of working on how do we get countries to understand that holistic nature of tech within their strategic foreign policy.
Okay. Well, now, if you were an ordinary citizen thinking, I need to participate in an NGO that actually does something for the world, and as a non-technical person, how can I join and be contribute to an NGO that would actually be useful? Are there such outfits that you would recommend that people, ordinary people, participate in, people who are not themselves technically expert?
My course I teach it's for political science. It's really, and I say this to the students all the time, is that these are a lot of the challenges that we're facing in understanding different parts of this ecosystem are for people who are really good at problem solving. So I think there's all different ways to contribute skills within the wider picture. If you want to, if it's helping mentor people, if it's helping, whether we still have, and there's a lot of organizations dedicated particularly to women in cyber and women in tech, and it's not just about science degrees, and I think that's really important.
Well, I guess
to remember.
My feeling is I've been preoccupied with democratization, keeping all kinds of government or industrial processes more accountable to ordinary citizens. And my beef now is that there is less and less accountability, whether we're talking about corporations or government or any other, and especially when it comes to the internet. I mean, technology, the cyber world is in no sense accountable to me. Nobody has to explain themselves and justify what they're doing. And if I am not happy with something, I have no recourse. I have nothing to say about it. I either buy this new app and follow the instructions or forget it. Because, in fact, I can't forget it because the law requires me to do things now that I have to do online. Now, what I'm saying is that this is a lack of democracy, it's taking power away from human beings in a way that I don't like. And what I want is to restore some of that balance so that I have something to say about these processes that I'm required to do. And I want to give the same kind of power to other people.
Yeah, and the good thing, and I'm glad you mentioned the word the internet, because people often forget that this, about the internet, and the sort of the management of the internet or the governance of the internet is actually a massive multi-stakeholder endeavor. There has been a push by states to sort of take it over, but it's always been a multi-stakeholder endeavor. So, you talked about looking for NGOs that you're interested in getting involved with, and looking at that, the Internet Society is a really good place to start. It's an international organization dedicated to helping preserve the free and open and interoperable internet. And you're right in the sense that the internet and how it operates today, and certainly where some of the ways that we access information has become very, very muddied. And, I'm also personally interested in this, like, particularly how do we slow down some of the uh, sharing of information? How do we slow down having negative information pushed on us? Or how do we sort of work with putting our own agency back into the algorithmic process that's being thrown upon us as we engage with the internet? And it's a very live conversation, and it is, you're absolutely right, undermining. I have shared similar concern to you in the sense that it undermines the quality of democracy, because if the internet, where people are primarily receiving their information, becomes a place that either it becomes too, if we think about it as flowing water, and it becomes too dirty to drink from it, for want of a better expression, then people won't go there. And that also affects the quality of democracy. And if you think of even all the micro businesses, if you think something like Instagram, where there's all sorts of micro businesses, there's a whole new economy that's based on it, then those are going to fall away. So this, you're right to call for that. We do need to put, if you want, the preservation and sustainability of a healthy internet front and center.
Thank you. This has been so fascinating. Thank you very much for this. And I wish you...
My pleasure.
Well, I hope it has been, because it is a thrill for me. And I certainly wish you all kinds of success in what you're doing. So, bless you.
Well, no, thank you. It's been one of the most fun conversations I've had in ages. It's gone to everywhere and beyond, and
Well,
always
wait,
happy
I
to
may come back at you.
chat.
I may come back at you for more. Who knows?
Any day would be my honor. Hopefully, we will have lots of more free time, because you'll have had all your AI agents do all your nitty gritty work that you don't want to do.
Fine, we'll talk fun things. Okay, let's see. Have a good day.